the war's yet again dragging on way too long. This isn't sustainable anymore. Even being in the whole country isn't sustainable anymore. So we had to find a way out. But mind you, I don't have like a passport. I have no legal way to get out of the country. Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Culture Overload, the realest podcast in the game, where it's just some real people having some real conversations. If you're new to this podcast, it's a podcast where we talk about anything and everything from news, politics, story times like today, whatever it is, you name it, we talk it. With that being said, if you are overly sensitive, this podcast is probably not going to be for you. I don't filter out what I say. I'm not politically correct all the time. So if you're a snowflake, if you're overly sensitive, leave while your feelings are still intact. Even though today's episode isn't really hopefully no one's feelings are going to be hurt. Just a little disclaimer that I think I should put in at the beginning of every episode, just because of our, slow snowflake, overly sensitive society nowadays. With all that out of the way, let's get into today's episode. I have one special planned for you guys today. Hopefully it's going to be an entertaining one. Get your slippers on, get some popcorn, get some hot chocolate, get cozy, get comfortable. It's going to be a wild ride on this episode today. And, after all that hype, you're wondering, what am I talking about? Today I think it's really important, episode 31, that I give you guys a little bit more into me, into the background of who I am, I guess, and then maybe, because in a lot of episodes, it is a lot of opinion and a lot of things from, I guess, looking back at my past, you might be able to understand some of the things that I say in future episodes. So it's kind of like a get to know me type of episode today. And I said for those of you that are regular listeners of this podcast, you remember I've mentioned before that you guys are probably going to get to know me better than anyone in my life, really. And this is really this episode is truly evidence of that, because no one has really gotten this in depth explanation of my whole life story and background leading up to now and who I am now. I think that would give you guys a better understanding. And there's a lot of as we go through this story, you guys will see that there's a lot of crazy shit that I've been through, and it's in no way, this episode is in no way for people to feel pity or feel bad for all the things that I've been through. It's just kind of like an entertainment sort of episode. Hopefully it'll entertain you through all the crazy shit that I've been through, and I guess give you another understanding, because I feel like the reason I also started this podcast is conversations, and you can learn. There's so much you can learn from just talking to people and hearing their stories, and it gives you another background or kind of perspective on things. So this episode, that's kind of what it's meant to be, to kind of give you a new perspective and kind of see the background, like I mentioned before, the background of why I say things that I do say. And yeah, like I said, no way to pity me. And as I was preparing this episode, it was crazy, because I always tell people in my life, whenever they're how do you figure out what you're passionate about? How do you figure out what you like? I always say look back at your childhood, look back at what you liked as a kid, and that will tell you a lot about who you want to become as a person. And I truly believe that. And before even preparing this episode, as I was preparing this episode, and I was remembering even more in-depth stories and stuff like that, it really was okay, it made me double down on that belief, and it just revealed so much to me. And it's okay, now I get why I'm into all these things that I'm into. And I guess also maybe that's also another explanation for my mental health issues, I guess, that we'll get into later on. I think this is going to be a 3-parter. We'll see how it goes. It's just going to be a new series called Story Time. And yeah, as I was going back, maybe those things that I did endure did affect my mental health now. And as I was looking back, it was there's a lot of things that maybe a kid shouldn't have been going through, or shouldn't have been thinking. And like I said, in no way to pity me. It was just an understanding and perspective. And hopefully it'll entertain you enough to stick around till the end, and hopefully you'll stick around to even see listen to the continuation of the story, because I think today we're going to be, so today's kind of agenda, today's episode, what I'm planning on is going through kind of the background of my childhood, and then kind of going into like kind of just like the area that I lived in, like the country at the time, because for those of you that don't know, like I wasn't actually born in Canada, and it might be hard to believe, like how the hell do you have an accent? No one speak English. We'll get all into that in this episode. I'll talk about my birth, childhood, background, and the ghetto-ness and the lifestyle, I guess, the setting that I was in at the time, and then also I have endured some war, and I did have to illegally immigrate at some point in my life. So I'll get into depth about those things on this episode. So all that blabbering out of the way and all the introduction to this episode, let's get right into today's episode. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of today's episode. So I was born in Syria in 1999, and then I don't really remember, I was a little fucking baby at the time. Of course, I wouldn't remember anything, but I don't really remember any of that life in Syria, because, we had to leave and live in Lebanon right after my birth. So I was really young at the time, so obviously I wouldn't remember anything. So I don't really remember any of like the baby life, I guess, in Syria, because I was a baby at the time. And then my life was basically, like most of my childhood was basically lived in Lebanon because of political issues. Like my dad was always kind of like outspoken, and if you know anything about Middle Eastern politics, it's like you talk shit about the leaders or the dictators or whatnot, that's the last thing you want to, that's the only thing you really don't want to do over there, because there'll be consequences. You can either go to jail or whatnot, and that's basically what he was running away from. He's basically like in his own country, talked shit about like the dictatorship, and always try to bring down the government and whatnot. And like looking back at that, I'm like, oh, maybe that's why I'm so rebellious and like against government. But yeah, like, so we had like political issues, so I couldn't really live in Syria, because then my dad was kind of wanted in Syria too. We moved to Lebanon, and that's where most of my childhood was. As a kid, I was always kind of known as a smart kid, and I was like, that's what everyone kind of called me. I never really believed it. I don't think I actually started sinking that in until like the past couple of years. Like maybe I am smart, maybe just a little, maybe. I don't give myself that much credit, but as a kid, I would always like, and I don't know if anyone else did this as a kid, but like whenever I would get bored of a toy or whatnot, I would try to like take it apart and see what's inside, and then obviously it's useless at that point, and then I would just like toss it off the balcony, see how gravity works, see how physics works, and see what happens to it when it hits the ground. And then that's one thing about my childhood. And then I was actually able to get an education, even though, so in Lebanon the schooling was private, but I was actually able to get an education, and it was pretty expensive. Like if you only really got good education if you had like decent money. Luckily, I actually was able to get education because my mom was a teacher at the time. So I was basically a student at every school she was teaching at, and that's how I basically got my education. So my mom was a teacher at the time, and then my dad had like a little bookstore, kind of library thing by a university, and then at the same time had like a publication where they'd write like children's stories and whatnot. And then in school, I was always called a smart kid, and I was even like looking through my like old stuff from like old country and shit, and I found report cards, and it was, I never thought I was like literally a straight A student, but it was literally all straight A's on my report card. And I was also, so like you guys, like the English, I was in Lebanon, like the second language was basically English. So they like really like, if even like, I'm pretty sure if you talk to Lebanese people now, like they know how to speak English pretty well. But so I was basically taught English all throughout, my childhood education. So when I came to Canada, I didn't even actually need to go into ESL or anything. And like right now, obviously I don't have an accent, so English was kind of ingrained in me as a kid, I guess. And maybe I also moved to Canada at a really young age too. That definitely had something to do with it. But then, I was taught English, but I think, I don't know if this is one factor that played into why I was a straight A student, but oh my God, over here, you wouldn't even think of this shit happening. But over there, like the punishment and discipline, like I remember I remember when they'd hand out report cards. Over here, it'd be a secret in the little package. You can take it home, open it, whatever. You can even hide it from your parents if you really tried until the signature. But over there, it would be like they would line up the whole. So they do it in the classroom. They would line up the whole class, start handing out the report cards one by one. And I remember if you had like a bad mark or whatever, they'd make you stick out your hands, and it wasn't like the palms of your hands. It was like the front end where your knuckles are. They'd make you stick out your hand and give you like 5 hits with a meter stick. The principal would be there like with a meter stick, and they'd give you like 5 whipperoonies to the knuckles. Next, you'd be crying fucking in front of your whole class trying to hold up when your parents beat your ass and then you're trying to be tough but not really, so your tears are like starting to like roll. Yeah, that's how it basically was. Really, I was a straight A student, so I never got beat. But I remember, if you were a bad kid, if you like acted up in class or whatnot, your teacher could like smack your hands with a ruler stick. But like the one regular punishment, like even for something really minor, like talking to some kid in class or whatnot, they would put you in like quote unquote timeout. And this timeout would most of the time would be like a punishment where they'd make you like stand. Most of the like it's something based around like the idea of just standing against the wall, and you'd have like one arm up against the wall and then one leg up for like 5 or 10 minutes or whatnot. And that shit would like get tiring. It would actually get tiring. And I remember even one time, so like if that would happen, like she'd pick like one kid if you acted up or whatnot. But I remember one time, I don't know what happened, but I think the whole class pissed off the teacher. So she's like, all right, fuck you guys. The whole day, you guys are not sitting. You're standing for the whole class for the whole day. She made us stand for the whole day, and you can't really do anything. So I would remember, I think she even made us put up our arms for like a lot of it, and that got tired. That made it even more tiring. I remember we were literally just looking forward to break, just to actually get a break from the punishment. Another story that I remember kind of compared to, I kind of compared it to the snow days here when we were kids, and I'm guilty of it. We always complained about like when we'd have snow day or when it'd be a lot of snow and we wouldn't get a snow day. But I remember this one time in my country, it was basically like so our winters over there, we don't get snow, we get a lot of rain. It's just a lot of rain mostly. Like our summers would just be really hot, thankfully not humid. It would be just really hot and like sunny most of the time, and then our winters would be like mostly cloudy and rainy most of the time. But it wouldn't really get that cold. But I remember this one winter, we had like a massive like thunderstorm, like rainstorm overnight, and I remember I was like I couldn't sleep just because like it was going off. Like every 2 seconds you'd hear lightning and thunder, and it just wouldn't stop raining the whole night. I remember getting up for the morning, it was just like a regular day, take your shower, get ready for school, get dressed. I remember in the winter, one thing we always did was, so we'd have like little radiator heaters that you'd plug in, like those little electric heaters. And I remember like the one thing in the winter I'd always do is like just like lay my mom would always like lay my clothes on it before like I have to wear them. So I'd get out of the shower and my clothes would be like nice and toasty, and then go downstairs and wait for my little van. So we got picked up in these little vans. They basically have almost the same amount of seats as a Grand Caravan or whatnot, but the van was so small. It was like, I think like Suzuki vans or whatnot. It's kind of like a rapist van, but like someone shrunk it a lot, and it would be like the size of a sedan, but it's a little van that would come pick you up for school. Because realistically, like over there, most of the time your school was nowhere near your house, so you were getting like driven to school, and it wasn't like districts like here. It was like whatever school you're signed up for, or like in my case, whatever school my mom was working at. So I remember that day, it was like raining and it was all that shit. We woke up the morning, it was like a regular morning, getting dressed and all that, but you look outside and I go downstairs and whatnot, and there's like at least 2 to 3 feet of water and filling up the whole street. You see the van pulling up and it's like half submerged in water. The kids are all in there, it's like a regular day, everyone's there. We're all going to school. And I remember our school was like in a really, really dense area. And it was like technically like those stereotypical like Arab villages. If you Google it, I don't know if villages is the right word, but maybe like markets or, yeah, like an Arab community. And I remember like that whole community was like submerged. I remember some houses had like two steps or whatever, like a couple steps to get. You had to walk down and then walk up to the door. And I remember like we were driving past these doors and everyone was just like trying to do damage control. The fucking water was more than halfway up to the door, and then we'd get dropped off at school. I think our school was like raised, like plateaued a little bit, so it was just above the flood. So the school wasn't actually like the courtyard wasn't flooded. So we got dropped off. It was a regular day at school. Went home like a regular day, and it was just like I compared that to our snow days. I'm like, holy shit, imagine that over here. But yeah, so that's kind of the education, kind of the schooling background of things, and then a lot of the time growing up. So the we lived in one apartment building, which this I don't really remember much from that because I was super young. But most of the things that I remember are from this second apartment building that we moved into, and the first apartment building, that's gonna be important later on with the war thing. Just keep that in mind. And I'll bring that up later. But so most of the things that I remember are from this one other apartment building that we moved into, and I remember we moved across, like down the street a little bit, and across was a whole like military air base, and I remember I think like even throughout the whole country, like you would see like military convoys were just a regular thing. It would be a bunch of tanks and soldiers walking by, and like Humvees, and you see those like big army transport trucks, and those would be full of like army personnel, and it wouldn't be like one or two tanks and it was like a small drive-by. It would be like a full-out convoy, I'm telling you. So like that happens on the regular. And another thing was they would always have like randomly, also at random times, you'd be going from place to place, and there'd just be, it reminds me of the drinking, what is it called? The fucking, what are those like pit stops where they check when you're drunk? I forgot what it's called, but it reminded me of those, like these checkpoints the police check up to make sure you're drunk. But it would be like a whole military checkpoint. So it would be like a tank, and it would be these, I don't know how to explain them, but those like star kind of looking things? They look like big like pound marks, I guess. And they're just big metal pound marks, and they'd be put fences, and it would kind of be like a zigzag. You have to drive the car through, You'd get stopped at the beginning, get asked a bunch of questions, make sure you're not a terrorist or whatnot. And then I remember one thing. So when I was a kid, I also asked so much questions. Like, whenever I was curious about something, I go, what is that? What is that? And I remember specifically asking about this one thing at checkpoints. So whenever you're done, like driving, zigzagging through and whatnot, at the end, it would always be a tank, and then there'd be like a metal strip that goes across where the car goes, drives over. So I was like, I asked my parents, what is that? Because I would always see it. And I remember, I don't know if my parents, were telling me, I don't know if it was just a joke or what, but I think they told me it was like, oh yeah, that's like a bomb detector. So, if there's a bomb in the car, it'll just blow up. And I remember from that point on, every time we drove over those, I was like, oh my god, are we gonna blow up? Does this taxi driver have a fucking bomb on him? Like, are we gonna die right now? But I just remember that one thing that I just remembered vividly. But that was like maybe that's why I'm so like, I remember I don't know if this was after or before the war, but I remember like I used to draw a lot, and literally all of my drawings, I remember for sure after the war, it was all like just like war scenes and whatnot. It would just be like the only thing I really knew how to draw were like tanks, helicopters and buildings being blown up and people like running or whatnot and little guns. So like I don't know if that started after the war or if it was just a thing just because I saw so much like army and military and stuff like that. And I remember when I was a kid, even like growing up, I thought like here, trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was like, I for one point I considered like really joining the army and like being in the military, and maybe it was influenced because of that. But along with that, that was like the military side of things, and then politics were also a big thing in my life because he always watched the news. Like it was to the point where it was like, kind of toxic. He would really like watch the news over like care about his family to the point. I remember he was always watching the news, but also I think like he had a point because he was also like a known name in politics because he would always be on like this big network station. Like Canadians probably wouldn't know it, but any Arab, like it's really big news station in the Middle East and all that, and it's called like Al Jazeera. So he'd always be like on interviews for that and just be like a guest on that and talking about politics and whatnot. So that was like one part of the politics. And I also remember one time as a kid, there was like, I think this also happened like more recently, like not more recently, but like later on when we were in Canada, something similar like to it happened. But I remember when we were back there, I think it was from a country, someone from a certain country. I think it was Denmark or whatnot. They made like cartoons like mocking our prophet, like in the Muslim religion, Prophet Muhammad or whatnot. So obviously like Muslims in the Middle East were just outraged, and I think it was like back, I think it was from like Denmark, or like a publication from Denmark. So it was either that or an actual publication, and there was a location in our country. Because I remember there was a big protest in front of this facility, and everyone was a part of it. There was like families, kids, like literally I think everyone in the whole fucking country, like city or certain area was there. And then it got to a certain point, it started getting heated. So I remember like the moms and the kids were like all left, and I remember we were this one family friend, so we went back to their house, and as soon as we get there, we put on the news and just to see what's going on about it, and there was like a live broadcast, and you see it turned fucked. Like the whole embassy or publication, whatever the building was like burnt down. They were burning all their papers. They were destroying all the computers. They were smashing the building, and it was just fucked. Like that was the point. We started seeing that. That was the moment we decided to leave. We started seeing smoke and shit. We started seeing like shit was getting hectic, so we just dipped. Like the kids and stuff, we dipped and we just watched the rest on the news. But that was like another big thing like in politics, and I was always into politics as a kid and looking up into the Gaza and Israel conflict, and that's why I also wanted to bring up like that's why and I'll bring it up even with the war too. Like that's why maybe I have so much hatred toward Israel, and you guys probably hear that in some episode. It's not like towards Israel or whatnot, but like I just hate their military and their fucking just government, basically. But yeah, that's just like the politics and stuff. And then just some things that I thought should be mentioned was we lived, and this will be important yet again when the war breaks out, but in the Middle East, and especially in Lebanon, there's a big divide between like Shia and Sunni, and that's basically just like two like divides of Islam. It's like Catholic and Orthodox, or it's kind of like that except in Islam. And then so those are like the two biggest like factions, I guess you'd call them. So the sad truth about it was, if you're like a Sunni, you were well off. Like the Shia neighborhoods were the ones that were kind of ghetto and all of that, and that's so we were broke. So most of the time we ended up living in Shia predominant neighborhoods. So we basically were like, even though there was a divide, we were friends with all our neighbors, and we even had Shia friends, and it was completely normal, even though there was like that huge divide. Like, and that's why to this day, I think no matter what it is, even if you're different, you can still kind of get along. Even if you believe in different things, you can get along. And that was just, maybe one thing that subconsciously affected me as a kid. And that, looking back at it, I'd never really thought about it until I prepared this episode. We lived together with Shia and Sunni, and it wasn't like a big deal. So that's one important thing. We lived in a Shia predominant area, and they were usually ghetto. So, and also, this was another thing that I think maybe impacted like what I wanted to do when I grew up, because I was like we grew up, like my house, our apartment building was in an industrial zone, and right behind us were just a bunch of shops and did different things. But literally right behind our building and like below us, there was a mechanic shop, but it wasn't like any regular mechanic shop. They repaired like construction equipment, so there was always like bulldozers and excavators and all these like construction trucks there. And I would always, like, for me, like my entertainment was just sitting on the balcony sometimes, and I would just get lost watching what's going on like all around in the backyard area, because there was that, and then there was another like carpentry, like woodworking shop, and then even more and more down there was like I don't know what it was, but there was always something going on. They were always picking something up with a crane or some shit, and I would always just like sit on the balcony and just get lost in that for hours and just keep watching. And a lot of my entertainment was literally just like sitting on the balcony or looking out the window and just watching life go on. And I actually didn't even think about that till now. But that was another thing. And then we also, oh my god, we lived near an airport, so like hearing airplanes like land and whatnot was just like a regular thing. So we lived by an airport, and there's also like a beach, so we could literally, from our balcony, we can see the beach, and when planes land it would just kind of cut across the beach or whatnot, and they would be like pretty close, so they'd be pretty big in size, like you can see the logo and everything. But I remember the sunsets over there, oh my god, they were so gorgeous. You like sit out on the balcony, and literally the sun would just be setting over the beach. And even though even though we lived by a beach, I think we only stepped foot on that beach once, and never ever swam there, because it was dirty as fuck. Like, I think the one time we went to the beach, like we went to set foot on the beach, garbage everywhere. Like, I'm pretty sure the water was just grimy. Like, it's not somewhere you want to swim. So even though we lived by a beach, I didn't really spend a lot of time on that beach. And then, yeah, like, airport, we'd always hear, like, every time, sound of airplanes landing. Every, like, maybe like 20 minutes, 30 minutes or whatnot, every hour, you'd hear an airplane land and just watch that. So for those of you that don't know, like, to me, I'm so into infrastructure and, like, just how the world operates. And maybe that was just a big part of it, was just seeing all this crazy shit just going on around me as a kid. That was kind of like the neighborhood that we kind of lived in, and just the background of that. But now we kind of get into just the country itself, and just kind of how the infrastructure and everything was set up. So I remember, like, for getting around, I don't think there was actually dedicated bus routes or any sort of dedicated public transport by the government. I don't know if there was in the capitals too much. We didn't really spend too much time in the capital. We only had like a close family friend there, so only be there to visit. But I remember, like, the main way to get around was these quote unquote buses, and so we'd have these buses and then these taxis. So these buses, though, they wouldn't be like a city bus, like the size of a city bus here. It would be the same size of that little van that I was telling you guys for that school. So it would have the same seating as a Dodge Caravan, like I said. Just like a mini rate van. I'm pretty sure you can look them up, like little Suzuki van or something like that, and you can see exactly what I'm talking about. But yeah, those little vans were basically our forms of buses. So they were the cheaper version, but the drivers would try to maximize their profit or money, so they would cram in, there'd be 5 seats in the back, but they'd cram in as many as you can get. No seatbelt laws over there. No even road. Like, honestly, in that country, I don't think I've ever seen a traffic light. Like, I don't know how the fuck traffic worked. It just worked. I don't think I saw a traffic light till I moved to Syria for a bit. Yeah, it was just like fucked. So, I remember these were the buses, little mini rape van buses. I remember one time we were at, like, our equivalent of the farmer's market, and we were like with our close family friend and, my best friend at the time. So I remember, we were done our shopping, and there'd be like their version of a bus station. It wasn't really like a official bus station. It was just kind of an area where a lot of those vans can just congregate and wait to pick people up after they're done shopping. So obviously, when you're done shopping and it's like a big farmer's market, there'd be so many people. No one really had a lot of people didn't really have their own cars there unless you were really well off. So after their shopping, they'd pack as many as they can in this little van. And I remember the one time, I don't know what the fuck, the driver wasn't paying attention or whatnot. He thought everyone got in. My friend was still like half out of the van. Like he had one foot in the van, and luckily he was like holding that a hand resting on the inside. But then the van started to fucking skeet off. And my friend was like, everyone in the van was like, yo, chill, 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 chill. My friend was like fucking starting to get dragged behind and shit. And like the taxis, there was no phone. There's no phone call or phone number for taxis. It would just be standing at the side of the road, and basically like the hitchhiker, put the hitchhiker thing up. And I don't think it was even a thumb. You just stick your hand out and wait for a taxi to stop. But I remember like the one thing was they would like, stop, and then they'd ask you where you're going first, and then you tell them, and then if it's too far, an area they don't want to go, they could just be like, all right, nah, fuck you. And sometimes you'd be sitting there, especially since we lived in a ghetto area, sometimes we'd be standing there waiting for like 15 minutes just to get a taxi or get a way to get home. But I remember, here's the thing, even though you wait maybe like 15 minutes to get a taxi or whatnot, it was like, I don't know why, I would still prefer that transportation over to here. Because even though it's organized here, it takes so fucking long to get somewhere. Over there, it's so disorganized, and yeah, you wait 15 minutes to get a taxi, but when you get a taxi, you save like a whole 15 minutes when you're getting home. And you save a whole like a taxi is like $5 to get home from there, and like for a far distance. And those little vans were like $2 or something. But it was like way cheaper, and it was way quicker to get home and shit. That was like the transportation of the area. And then the ghetto areas over there, I remember, oh my god. So if, the ghettos over here, yeah, there's like a lot of crime and shit. But over there, I don't know if there was much, like a lot of crime specifically. But I was really young, so I wouldn't really gauge that. It was just, when you hear ghetto, you see it in front of you. Like, I remember this one family friend lived in this one building, and oh my god, like the first floor. So most of the buildings were, if you know architecture terms, they're kind of on stilts. So they would be kind of like, the actual building would be lifted, so it would be like just columns on the first floor, and it would be like almost like a garage kind of area. But over there would be no cars, and it would just be like overgrown, and it smelled like piss. There would be graffiti everywhere. There was like one main stairwell. I remember the elevator in that building didn't work, and this family lived on like the 15th floor, so it would be like, every time we'd go there, we'd have to take like a little bit break halfway through. But I remember like the elevator shaft. So they had like an elevator shaft. There was an elevator. But I remember the elevator shaft was just like, I think it was open. You can look inside. It was just creepy. It was borderline abandoned, but people lived there. Like, that just goes to show like how ghetto it was. And these people, like, it was like a 16-story building or whatnot. No elevator. It smelled like piss. The whole area was kind of ghetto. Like, I honestly really want to go visit again, just see how it is. Just because it's so cool. Maybe that's why I love abandoned and like ghetto kind of abandoned-y places, is because like I saw it so much growing up, but it's just a cool vibe. But it was really ghetto. And I remember this family was like on the 15th floor, and there'd be shops on the first floors or whatnot. And I remember whenever Minute Ish was like the breakfast over there. Like, that's what you'd have for breakfast. And that's honestly my favorite food to this day. So we'd have like there was a store on the first floor. So instead of going up the stairs with the fucking food and all that, the family would just have a rope connected to a bucket and just string it all the way to the first floor. Someone will put the shit in the bucket, and then you lift it all the way up. But it was just like awesome how you adapt in the ghetto. But that was kind of just like how the ghettos were. And then in our area especially, power outages and blackouts were just a regular thing. Like, and they weren't like scheduled. Like, you wouldn't know when it happened. You would just have to prepare for sometime during the day, maybe almost every day. Sometimes, yeah, it would almost be every day. Be like, all right, get ready for the power to go out for like a good 2, 3, 4, 5 hours. It's unpredictable. It can go on for a long time sometimes. Power outages and blackouts were such a regular that I remember one of our neighbors, he owned like a mechanic shop a little bit down the street, and he owned like a generator, obviously, to run his business. But he did a thing where if you lived in the building and you paid him like a certain amount a month or whatnot, you'd get hooked up to the generator, so anytime the power went out, you'd still be blessed. But I remember, that was too expensive for a lot of people. So I remember our one neighbor was like teaching us this trick where you go into like the electrical room of the building, which was like, it was ghetto itself. It was like dirty, smelled like abandonedness. It smelled like stale air. It looked like it was rat infested. But I remember he would teach us this trick where sometimes you just have to try your luck. You go in there in that room and then you take out the power for take this one wire for your unit and try to tap it to these 3 other wires, and then sometimes if you're lucky enough, one of those wires will have power. But yeah, it was just all these ghetto ideas to adapt. Yeah, power outages were so regular. Like candles, when we moved to Canada, the first like bit, I was like, why don't we have candles? Like, what happens if the power goes out? And it's like, the power's not gonna go out here. Yeah, I remember like we had to have candles on stock, like stocked up, and we had to have a big propane heater just in case when the power goes out, and if it goes out at night. And then I remember this one. So this is one funny story that also talks about how shitty like the services and infrastructure was. Was one time we had a fire in our building, and over there, the stoves, they're not electric, and they're propane stoves, but they're also not hooked up to like, the building doesn't have like a supply line to give it like propane like they do here. Like it would be like a certain line in the building already you can just connect to. Over there you would have to get like a huge propane cylinder. So it would just be like a barbecue propane cylinder, except like almost like a barrel size of that. When that ran out, you would have to go refill it and put it back in the stove, and that's how you get your stove working. That was the dangerous part. So this lady had a fire in her building, or in her apartment, and her husband wasn't home or whatnot. And it's crazy. It's scary because if the fire goes out, if you can't get the fire under control and it gets to the propane tank, that propane tank's gonna fucking blow up like half the building. So, I remember the whole building was trying to put it out, and then I remember my parents were like, all right, go downstairs, because some people would have their businesses like on the first floor, and then they'd live somewhere else in the building. So I remember this one guy had like a mechanic shop on the first floor, and then, like I said, there was the construction equipment repair shop right behind us. So I was like, all right, go down there, go tell him that we have a fire, like we need help putting it out or whatnot. So I go down there, I tell him, he's like, all right. And luckily they had like fire extinguishers, because they obviously they have mechanic shops, so they had like fire extinguishers on hand. And while I was doing that, obviously like someone was calling 911, or I think it was 511 over there. It was like it was a different number, but it was something 11. I remember that was being called, and so the neighbor and all the neighbors were trying to put it out, and then my mom was like, all right, go downstairs, just make sure the firefighters see you or whatnot, or tell them like what floor it is when they get there. So I go downstairs and I'm like standing there, and apparently, so I asked my mom about the story, and she like clarified like what happened to it, what happened in it, since I was so young. But so I go downstairs, and you hear a firefighter coming. So I'm like, oh my god, thank God they're almost here. So I'm like standing there, and then all you see is just driving, like with its lights on and everything, just driving right by the building. And then I'm like, all right, what the fuck? So I go back upstairs, and I'm like, all right, they kind of drove by. And then I took in, so my mom told me they literally put out the fire, they had a coffee, and then the firefighter showed up later. I thought the firefighter just didn't show up after driving by. Yeah, apparently like the whole neighbors put it out, and then the like firefighters showed up like a whole 30 minutes later. But it just goes to show how shitty like all the services and all the infrastructure was at the time. And then this is when all shit breaks loose. This is when we're moving into the next part of this, and this is where war breaks out. This is when shit hits the fan. So at the time, like I said, I couldn't travel. I didn't have a passport. There were a lot of political issues around me, I guess, and around me traveling. So, we had this war breakout, and remember when I said earlier we lived in like a Shia predominant area. So this war was like with Israel and against this kind of group called Hezbollah. They call it like a terrorist group or whatnot called Hezbollah, and I think they are still here to this day. So it was a war between them, and Hezbollah was basically like a Shia predominant. It was a Shia like group. So the Israel war was basically against the Shia, and we lived in Shia predominant areas. And not only that, we had a military base right across the street. We lived in an industrial area, and we recently had a news station, the Al Jazeera news station that I was talking about earlier, opened up right across the street from us. So it was like our area was, you never know when it can get airstriked. So we ended up moving in with this family in the capital. For some reason, every time a war breaks out, the capital is always the safe place. But so we had a family friend that lived in the capital, so we moved in with them, and it was basically like 3 families in like a tiny ass apartment. Like I can't even. It's basically like a 1 floor of a house into one apartment. And honestly, the balconies in the so I had 2 balconies, one in the kitchen and one to the bedroom. The balconies alone could be rooms. The whole apartment was smaller than the balconies, but it was basically like a tiny ass little living room, 1 bedroom, and 1 little kitchen, and it was basically 3 families under that one house, and it had 1 bathroom as well. I remember, when it was the beginning of the war and whatnot, and we were getting adjusted to it, every time there'd be an airstrike, all you'd hear is the like jet sound. So you'd hear like a whoosh, and then like a big it was like you can compare the sound to thunder, except it was like 50 times or 100 times louder. And it like shook the whole ground. And sometimes it'd be like, once, and then sometimes it would be like 3 in a row. So it'd be like whoosh, and then like 3 airstrikes in a row, and like spaced out a little bit. So I remember after a while that we made up this game where we'd stand on the balcony and just look outside the balcony. Well, I think it started because we wanted to see if we can see any of the airplanes going by or some shit like that. So we'd stand outside on the balcony and be looking outside the balcony, and the game was to be the first one into like the deepest part of the house, I think. Like after you hear like the airplane go off or the bomb go off. And I remember this game because I remember we were standing on the balcony and my mom had her phone charging. I think my mom still has that phone. I kind of want to see if she does. But my mom had her little like Nokia phone charging and on the ground, like right by the door to that balcony. And I remember me and my friend were standing on that balcony and whatnot. And then, the bomb goes off. And then I remember we were like sprinting inside. And the reason I remember it so vividly is just because like I ended up like breaking my mom's phone or cracking my mom's screen. And it's a Nokia. Like cracking a screen on that thing is serious, guys. All right. Like, it ain't no joke cracking a screen on that. So I remember, like, I cracked that screen, and that was, like the one game we'd play. And, thinking about it now, it's kind of a fucked up thing to have, is it, like, as a game, I guess, as a kid, or it's kind of think about as a kid. I also didn't think it played that much of an effect on me until I kind of realized, like, when I first came to Canada, so airplanes like were a regular thing at my house, but like over here it's kind of like a rare sound. But I remember when I first came to Canada, anytime I would kind of hear an airplane, I'd be like, "Is this war? Is war going on?" Just because it was like such a rare sound here, and then when you hear it, I'm like, "Oh my god, what the fuck's going on?" Yeah, that was like one thing that I was like, "Okay, maybe this did affect me." But then, so we were all living in this family house, and then I remember it dragged on a little bit. So we had to go back home, pick up some stuff, maybe shower, since we were all in like one house. We obviously didn't get that much water access or whatnot. So, we go back to our house in this dangerous area, and it was a ghost town. Like, there was no one there. It was so dead. It was the weirdest thing ever. It was so eerie. But yeah, I remember we went back to our old neighborhood, and then, we went up to our building, got our stuff, and this was one thing that, I thought it was a joke. I think I first got exposed to it, or later got exposed to it in a game, where it would be like, oh, you'd drop like propaganda flyers, and I thought it was just like, a joke or something for the game. But then I remembered when I was a kid, that was actually a real thing, because I remember we came to our neighborhood and there was like these pink papers scattered everywhere, right? And we didn't think much of it, but then when we went up to our apartment, they were like all over the balcony, all over the courtyards behind us and whatnot. So like, I remember we would take a look at it, and I can almost remember what was on it so vividly. It was just a propaganda little cartoon clip art you can see in like a newspaper, mocking like all the world leaders of the Arab world. And I remember it was just like all these group leaders sitting in a circle and just like smoking hookah or whatnot, and it was just like the way it was mocking them was just through the text bubbles they were saying, and I obviously wouldn't remember any of that. But I remember that was one thing when we came back to our house, and then I remember I had to shower, and this was the one fucked up thing that I was like, okay, maybe this is like a fucked up thing to think about for a kid. But I remember I was having a shower in her building, and the only thing that I was scared of was, I was like, yo, I really hope I don't get airstrike like right now. I don't even think I was scared of dying. I just didn't want to die naked there, like showering. And I don't know why it was like a big deal for me, but I just didn't want to like die exposed, I guess. So I was just scared like we were gonna get airstriked while I was showering the whole time. So we pick up our stuff, we see all the propaganda flyers and whatnot. We wait like fucking an hour for the one lonely taxi that somehow drove by the area, and we get driven back, and we stay at our friend's house for a while. But then the war's yet again dragging on way too long. This isn't sustainable anymore. Like, even being in the whole country isn't sustainable anymore. So we had to find a way out. But mind you, I don't have like a passport. I have no legal way to get out of the country. So the family we were living, like our family, our closest family friends at the time were like Algerian. The Algerian embassy was going through some efforts to get all the Algerian citizens out of the country and to refuge, and they were like sending people to Syria. And it was perfect because my mom had family in Syria. All her family is in Syria. So I don't know, I think my parents or the family talked to the embassy and whatnot, and they somehow organized it. Everyone basically knew that I couldn't like get across, so this whole fleet, like everyone's gonna have to work together to sneak me across. So, we're at this embassy and whatnot. We go on our way. We were driving in this, so we're going basically in like a Greyhound type of bus, with the comfy seats and whatnot. And it was like one of those, so there'd be like two seats on each side, and then on the last seat in the back, and this will be important later on, the last seat in the back was just one long seat across the whole back. So, we go on, we're going through, we first hit the Lebanese border. This honestly was such a joke. Like, I remember this vividly as well. This was such a joke, like the security on that border. And I guess they wouldn't really care because you're leaving the country, but so we literally got off the bus. We walked, me and my mom took our stuff. We literally walked right through the checkpoint. Like, we literally walked right past the soldier with like a gun and whatnot. Made eye contact with him. He did not ask us a single thing. Literally, as soon as we get on the other side of it, the bus stops, picks us up. No questions asked. But then the Syrian border, this is where things are a little more tight. And I guess this is where they had to get a little creative on what to do to sneak me across. So everyone on there was legal except for me. Even my mom. Like, my mom had a passport. She would always go back and forth across the border. I didn't have any papers. I didn't have a passport. I couldn't legally get across. So I remember we stop at the border. They know there's gonna be like an officer that's gonna go on, and he's gonna go through all the seats and check everyone's passport. So as soon as we get there, my mom sends me to the back. This family picks me up, like grabs my hand or whatnot, pulls me all the way to the back. They were sitting all the way at the back where that long seat is I was talking about. So I guess they had planned with that family that they were gonna hide me. So they had like a bunch of stuff stacked in the right, uh, so it'd be like right behind the last two seats. You know how it says there's two seats on each side. So it was the last one before the last two seaters on the right side. They pulled me there. They told me to like duck down and just be quiet, like try not to breathe, just be quiet as you can, and just wait till like call me up. And then they like stacked. I think they put like jackets on me. I don't know what they put. They like put stuff on me, try to cover me up. And I remember it was like a James Bond mission right there. Like I was like trying not to breathe. I was trying to be still as possible. I was scared shitless because I knew it would be serious if I get caught. Like I don't know what might happen to me, what might happen to my mom, or whatnot. So it was like literally like a James Bond mission. Literally wait, like you hear this guy getting closer, and I hear his voice getting closer and louder, getting closer and louder. I think it was to the point like I felt his presence right there, and then he asked the last family like passports, and that was like the moment of truth. I was like, all right, fuck, is he gonna ask about this whole pile? Is he gonna ask anything? Checks their papers. He's like, all right, you guys are good to go. Leaves the bus. We get through. Thankfully, we got through that border, and we get picked up by my mom's family. We get picked up where the bus dropped us off, and everything's fine and dandy. And that was like the first time I saw someone driving with no hands, because like one of our uncles picked us up, and he had a car, and he was just like, as a joke, driving with no hand. Like they were excited to see us, because realistically, my mom's side of the family has never met me until now, until we had to sneak over. So basically, we get picked up from the airport, and it was almost like life in Syria was like almost like culture shock by itself. I was almost like an alien too. Like everyone was the whole side of the family, and Arab families are huge, really, and especially I think in Syria, or I think in any Arab country really, but in our specific setting, it was like the whole family lived in like one apartment building. So like all the uncles and stuff, it was all in one whole apartment. So they'd take over the whole apartment building. They would all live in different units. But these apartment buildings were like huge. They're massive. One room, the living room, or my grandma's room, which it was, and the living room, it was like the size of a basketball court. It was massive. Even the ceilings were high. But I remember, so like it was all the family, and that was the first time meeting my mom's side of the family. So I was like an alien. Like I remember going when we first came into the building, everyone was like staring at me almost like some like literally like an alien, like they've seen me for the first time ever, which they were. And then so like the whole family lived in the one building. Even my one uncle had like a shoe store right across the building, and then the other uncle had the one that has passed away now, rest in peace. He had school supply store a little bit down the street, and it was just like a really community feel. Like that was the first time I really experienced what a community was, because like everyone really lived and worked there, everyone lived and worked in the same place. So everyone knew each other. There'd be like that one butcher, the one shoe. My uncle would be the shoe guy, my other uncle would be the school guy. And that was like the first time I felt community. And that was the first time I experienced okay infrastructure, because we had no power outages and potable water. Like I think you could drink straight out of the tap there, and I was like, wow, I was amazed by that. Also, like the war has dragged on. My parents didn't want me to hold back on my education or whatnot, so they enrolled me for school in Syria. So this was going to be like a whole new experience for me. And I remember me and my mom were going to get the uniform. It was almost like a Boy Scout uniform. Literally, it was almost like a skirt thing, and it had like that little bandana thing you wrap around your neck, and that little ring you run the bandana through in the front. And when we'd get into school, everyone would line up straight line in the courtyard, salute to the flag and to the anthem. But this was like the first time it was like I can walk to school, and the school was based on your distance. The school was pretty close to the house, so I could just walk there, and it was like the first time I can walk to school instead. But I remember this one story. I remember I was new, and I was a really shy kid, right? Like I was always really known as a really shy kid. So I remember I was new in the school and I didn't really know anyone and I was shy and I really needed to pee. But I didn't know where the bathrooms were and I was just too shy to ask. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to try to hold it in for the rest of the day. I hold it in, I hold it in. It's almost the end of the day and at this point it's getting bad. Like it's starting to get to the point where you're like your whole body's starting to like try to shake, try to like hold it in and whatnot. Like trying to hold it in as bad as you can. And then literally, I don't know if it was when the bell rang or right before the bell rang to the end of the day, I just pissed myself. And mind you, I think I was in grade 3 now. So like this is bad for that age. So I was embarrassed. There was like a whole pool of pee right in front of me and I was like crying to my mom that day and like I was like I don't want to go back to school and whatnot. But that was like the school life there. And I remember also like the we had so when we had Eid Carnival, so I was there for Eid Carnival, and oh my God, was that ghetto? Like it was funny how ghetto it was. So they would set up. Do you know how they set up the fairs here? They'd do it in the parking lot and those mobile fairs, and they'd set up like a Ferris wheel and whatnot. So for Eid over there, they would kind of do that somewhere in the neighborhood for like almost every neighborhood. So they'd have the Ferris wheels and all these different rides. And I remember we went on this Ferris wheel. None of these were electric operated. So guess how they operated them? You would never be able to guess. So we were sitting in the fucking Ferris wheel, and I see two fucking monkey teenage boys fucking climbing the thing. I'm like, Mom, what's going on? They're like, oh, they're just making this thing roll, this thing work. And I'm like, what the fuck? So you see these guys like climbing up the frame of it, and like a Ferris wheel, my guy, like a fucking Ferris wheel. And there's like 3 guys I think doing it, and they would just be climbing the thing and like literally pushing it to make it rotate. And I just remember that was like the craziest thing I ever seen in my life. And then so that was like life in Syria. But then this was when I had to move back. The war ended, everything was going back to normal. My dad obviously couldn't come to Syria now, so we had to go back. So this was like another challenge here. So when we were going to Syria, it was like a mass immigration. Everyone was kind of leaving at the same time. It was easier to like sneak across, right? But now that the war was done, everyone was kind of leaving back at their own different separate times. So we didn't have that luxury of like that whole van full of people there. I don't know how we were able to coordinate it. My parents coordinated it, but I guess there was a whole mission, and there was people like bribed, like along the lines, and people paid just to be able to sneak me back across the border. But I remember from this story, all I was really scared of was getting kidnapped, because I don't know why, it just felt so strange. I was just scared I was gonna get kidnapped, and I remember. So we were getting driven across. I think they had paid a driver or whatnot, and they had also paid some construction. There was construction going on right at the border. So I guess somehow they had been in contact with a construction worker there. They told them the situation, and I guess they paid him off, and they coordinated with him what's going to go down. So what happened was like right before they got across the border, I got picked up by this guy. The guy that worked the construction there, he picked me up in like the tractor excavator thing, and like the whole time I was just scared, is this guy gonna fucking steal me or whatnot, or kidnap me? But I remember, we get into his tractor and he shows me like a piece of ID, and he's like, if anyone asks, and he gives me like the name of the kid that was on the ID and the information and whatnot, and I'm like, okay, like this is serious. I try my best. But I remember the whole time just scared this guy was going to kidnap me. So he picks me up on the one side of the border. He kind of, picks me up in the tractor, drives through the construction site. And then he like goes into, I guess, part of the building that was being built. And yet again, I was shitting myself because I don't know, like, I thought, he's just going to pick me up, drive me and then I was gonna get picked up across. But I guess I don't know why there was like a bunch of people in one room. He took me to like this room, and there was like a bunch of people just chilling there. And I guess they were all just construction workers. Construction workers over there. They just lived on the site. So it was basically just a bunch of dudes in this one room, and they weren't like in their construction uniforms or anything. It was like house clothes basically. I think he was just like okay, like telling them what he was going to do right now or whatnot. I was really scared shitless again when he took me to that room because I thought they were gonna do something. He takes me there and then get in the tractor, and it's a little bit blurry, but I think he just drives me back. So they get across, my parents and whoever were in the car, they get across the border, and then the guy drives me to this, there was just this, all I remember was just this long road. I was just like, waiting, just like, it felt like the longest time ever, just waiting to see the car come back. And then, I see it driving down the road. I get picked up. I don't know. I don't remember if they put me inside the back passenger. This was again kind of blurry, or maybe in the trunk. I think I might have been put in the trunk if it was this blurry. Maybe I just saw darkness after that. The car drove by, and then the guy we got out of the tractor. He gave me to them, and I was so relieved. I remember, and then we came back to Lebanon, and then we immigrated to Canada, but I'm going to leave that for the second part. A quick message from Moaz in editing here. I realized that I mentioned the first building that we lived in when we were in Lebanon, and I said I was going to say something about it in when the war broke out, and I never did. So I'm just going to add this little note here because I think it's important. But that building that we first lived in Lebanon, I think we literally moved out of it 2 years before the war broke out. When we went back to Lebanon and whatnot, and we were seeing all the damage from the war, or hearing about all the damage from the war, we actually found out that building we used to live in was literally just flattened. It was literally airstrike to the ground. That whole plaza of buildings was just rubble after the war. So it was just kind of crazy how life worked. Imagine we used to live there when the war broke out. But yeah, just thought I would add this little part in. But we'll go back to the episode. Thanks a lot for tuning in. It's been a wild one. I hope you stuck through to the end. Let me know what you guys thought of this and what you thought of this episode. If you stuck through, what your opinions are. If you like this, if you want more story times like this. Yeah, like I said, the next part of this is going to be the immigrating to Canada process and kind of my childhood, starting my childhood in Canada, and then kind of my teenage years and my high school years. I think that'll be it for that. For this kind of story time segment. But like I said, guys, thanks for tuning in. Thanks if you stuck to the end. Stay tuned for part 2 of this. Please subscribe, follow the podcast, whatever platform you're listening to us on. And also at our Instagram at culture.overload and Twitter at culture, and then zero for the O, and then overload. And also, if you guys do want to see clips and quick digestible snippets of past episodes and broken down into little clips, we now have our YouTube channel for the clips up. And you can just Google YouTube or Culture Overload clips, and that should pop up for you guys. Thanks again for tuning into this episode. It's been a wild one. Let me know what you thought about it. Let me know what I can improve on for sure. And peace, and I'll see you guys on the next one.